The great hall of Wraithspire smelled like wood smoke and wolf, cedar burning somewhere deep in the stone walls, something older underneath, animal and wild and ancient, the kind of smell that gets into your clothes and your hair and eventually into the parts of you that don't have names. I had stopped noticing it sometime in the second year. That is what belonging to a place does to you, even when the place does not quite belong to you back. I want you to hold that image for a moment. A woman in a mountain hall at dawn, stone walls, torchlight fading as the winter sun begins to come up over the ridge. Everything quiet and cold and perfectly arranged, and a door, just barely open. That is where this story begins. Not with a fight, not with a betrayal anyone saw coming from a mile away. With a door slightly ajar, and a voice carrying through it, and 3 words that cost more than every careful year I had spent trying to earn something that was never going to be offered. Stay with me, because what happens after that door, what I chose, what I built, what I walked back into, carrying everything that mattered, that is the part worth telling. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Because I need to check on you before we go any further. Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. It is essential that we get your support through subscriptions, likes, comments, and shares. So, if this story is already pulling at your heart, which I know it is, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Thank you. Now, let us get back to the story. I was never a woman who slept late. Even before Wraithspire, even before any of this, I was the kind of person who woke before the light and used those quiet minutes as though they were the most valuable part of the day, which, for someone learning how to exist inside a new world without making herself a burden to it, they were. 3 years as Luna of Wraithspire had not changed that habit. If anything, it had made the habit more necessary. The great hall in those early minutes before the pack stirred was a completely different place. No hierarchies, no performance, just the low orange glow of torches burning down toward their ends, the distant sound of cooks working in the kitchen, the smell of old stone and warm bread drifting up through the back corridor. At old Kirian's apprentice, a quiet boy named Daveth, who moved through the world as though he was afraid of disturbing it, always left a small basket of morning bread on the low table near the east staircase before anyone else arrived. That bread, on most mornings, was the only thing in Wraithspire that felt entirely simple. My name is Zanira Moonridge. I arrived at Wraithspire 3 years ago as a political arrangement. I want to be honest about that from the beginning, because I spent a long time being something other than honest about it with myself, and the dishonesty cost me more than it was worth. My home pack and Wraithspire had a history, not a war exactly, but a long, cold distance between bloodlines that needed mending. I was the bridge. That is what arranged bonds are in our world. Bridges between families, between territories, between futures that require cooperation to survive. Torvin Nightfang was the Alpha King of Wraithspire. His name alone has a way of changing the air in a room. He is the kind of man that even strangers instinctively step around, not because he asks for it, but because something in the way he occupies space makes other people aware of their own edges. Broad and dark, and very still. The voice that comes out of that stillness is low and unhurried, and has never, in all the time I knew him, sounded uncertain about anything. I loved him, or I tried to love him, or I believed, for a long time, that trying was the same thing. His distance I explained to myself as the weight of leadership, A man who carries a whole pack's futures on his shoulders, I told myself, cannot afford to let people fully in. But that kind of closeness is a vulnerability. I was generous with my explanations. I was generous with most things in those years. I had decided, somewhere in the first few months, that warmth could be offered even when it was not returned, that there was worth in the offering itself, regardless of whether it was received. On the morning everything changed, I was taking the back corridor as usual. It was the 4th week of December. Outside the mountain, the valley below Wraithspire was buried under 2 feet of early snow, and the sky had been that particular flat grey for days, the kind of grey that feels less like weather and more like a decision. Inside the great hall, the fires had been burning all night, and the stone walls had absorbed enough warmth that the corridor was almost comfortable. Almost. I had just passed the staircase. Madevith's bread was warm in the basket. I had taken one piece and was walking slowly toward the east window, which faces the ridge and catches the first light on clear mornings, even grey ones. The door to Torvin's private study was fractionally open. I want you to understand. I was not suspicious. I had no reason to be suspicious. I was simply passing. I passed that door every morning. I had never once heard voices through it at that hour. But on that morning, there were voices. Hers came first. Visera Shadowfang's laugh was low and private. The kind of laugh that is not about something funny, but about something savoured. Something she has been holding close and is finally allowing herself to enjoy. She brought you tea again this morning. Her voice was smooth and warm. Every single morning for 3 years, Torvin. Not every single morning. Does she think that is what holds a king? There was a brief silence. The kind of silence that a room settles into when 2 people have been together long enough that no silence needs to be filled. Then his voice. Quiet. Completely unbothered. The voice of a man commenting on the weather. She means well. 3 words. My hand found the stone wall beside me. Not dramatically. It just found it. The way your hand finds something solid when the ground beneath you has shifted just enough that you need to know something solid still exists. She means well. I stood in that corridor, and I didn't cry. I did not make a sound. 3 years of learning to move through Wraithspire without drawing attention to myself had apparently prepared me for exactly this, for hearing the whole truth of my marriage in 6 words total, and having nowhere to put it except into my own chest. She means well. She still brings him tea. Does she think that is what holds a king? No, I did not think that. I had never thought that. I brought tea because I believed small kindnesses were worth offering, regardless of whether they were received. Because I had decided that warmth was not a strategy. Because I was, underneath all of it, simply a woman trying to love someone who had already decided what she was worth before she arrived. I became aware, very slowly, of my own breathing. And then I became aware of something else. My hand had moved, without my direction, or without my permission, from the stone wall to my abdomen. 8 weeks. I had known for 8 weeks, and I had told no one. I had been explaining it away with altitude and disrupted sleep, and the particular exhaustion of performing contentment every single day in a house where you are performing for an audience of 1 who is not watching. I had filed it quietly in the back of my mind under things to address when the rest of this feels more stable. Nothing about this was stable. Standing in that corridor with Torvin's voice still in the air and Visera's laugh still warm against the stone, I let myself, for the first and only time in 3 years, simply know what I knew. I straightened. I smoothed my dress, the grey wool one with the small buttons at the collar, which I had chosen myself and which no one had ever commented on. I turned, and I walked back toward the stairs. Not toward the kitchen, not toward the study door. Toward the stairs, and then upward, and then to the bedroom that had been ours and had always felt, in practice, mainly mine. I moved the way I had learned to move in Wraithspire, quietly, carefully, without drawing anyone's attention. It was the last morning I would spend in that house. The bedroom was still dark when I returned to it. Outside the window, the flat grey sky was beginning to lighten at its edges. Not quite dawn. Not quite anything yet. That in-between light that belongs to nobody. I stood at the window for a moment and looked at the ridge, which I had walked many evenings when the pack felt too close, and I needed something simpler than ceilings and expectations. The pine trees on the ridge were black against the grey, but the snow on their branches had not fallen yet. I had 20 minutes before the house fully woke. I did not stand there long. There is a kind of clarity that comes not from figuring something out, but from finally stopping the work of pretending you haven't already figured it out. It is a cold clarity. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with music or visible tears. It arrives the way winter does, quietly, completely, and in every corner at once. I opened the bottom drawer of the wardrobe, not the one with the dresses Torvin had never chosen for me, but somehow expected. Not the formal garments, the lunar gowns, the things I had been handed at functions and told were appropriate. The bottom drawer. There was a travel bag there, one I had carried from my home pack, Moonridge, 3 years ago. It was brown leather, small, with a brass clasp that needed to be pressed firmly to open. I had never fully unpacked it. I noticed this now, running my fingers along the clasp, and I filed the noticing away without judgment. Some quieter, more honest part of me had apparently known what the rest of me had spent 3 years refusing to look at. I packed warm things, practical things, 2 pairs of thick wool socks, a heavy sweater in dark green, mine, chosen by me, unremarkable and comfortable. The small journal I had been filling with Ridgepath notes and pressed lavender, my travel documents, folded into the inside pocket of an old coat. The money I kept in the lining of that coat, not a large amount, but enough to move without being traced, which I understood now had been precisely why I had kept it there. I packed without rushing. I packed without panic. I thought about Elira. 17 years old, with a jaw like a challenge, and eyes that missed nothing. She ran laps across the courtyard stones every morning before breakfast. Not because she was required to, but because she had decided some time ago that strength was not a gift but a practice, and she practiced it daily. She had never been officially warm to me, but she had always been honest, which in Wraithspire was rarer and more valuable than warmth. Once, in the 3rd month of my first year, she had told me directly, and without softening it, that the elder in the North Wing didn't respect me yet. Not disrespect, just not yet. And I had thanked her, and she had looked at me like she was recalculating something. I thought about Mara Grimwood, the pack healer, 60 years old, silver-haired, was with the manner of a woman who has seen too many things to be surprised by any of them. She had looked at me, sometimes, with an expression I could never fully name, something adjacent to apology, something unspoken that I had never quite gathered the courage to ask her about. I thought about the ridge path at dusk, pine smell and open sky, and the specific peace of being somewhere that was not expecting anything from me. There are things you love about a place that have nothing to do with whether the place loves you back. I allowed myself, briefly, to think about Torvin, not as he had been this morning, not that voice, flat and unconcerned, as he had been at the bonding ceremony 3 years ago across the fire circle. The light had been gold and amber, and the whole of Wraithspire had gathered on the ridge. He had looked at me across that fire, and his gaze had stayed. Just stayed. And I had thought, standing there in the warmest light, that whatever he was feeling in that moment was something real, something beginning. I was not foolish for believing it. I was generous, and generous people sometimes misread stillness for depth. It does not make the misreading hurt less when you finally understand what it was. I closed the travel bag, pressed the brass clasp firmly until it clicked. I didn't leave a note. I considered it briefly and decided against it. What I needed to say couldn't be said in a note, and what he needed to hear was not something he was ready to receive at a breakfast table next to his morning tea. I took the back staircase, the one that comes out near the storage rooms and the kitchen garden, which faces east and is sheltered enough that the snow piles on the far side of the wall rather than the path. Old habit. 3 years of it. The courtyard was empty. Elira had not started her laps yet. The stone was cold and clean under a thin skim of overnight snow, and my footprints were the first ones across it. I walked to the eastern gate, which is the small gate, the one used by the kitchen staff, and not the ceremonial one at the front. I pressed my hand to the iron briefly as I passed through. Not in farewell. Not dramatically. Just felt it. Cold. Solid. Real. Then I was on the mountain road, walking south, with the pack behind me and the valley below, and everything I had spent 3 years building, or trying to build, or pretending to be in the process of building. All of it. Behind me. The morning air hit my face like a clean, honest thing. I kept walking. At the base of the mountain, there is a small human settlement called Ardenvale. One gas station, a diner with weather-beaten signage that reads, "Open," with what might charitably be called optimism. A narrow road heading south toward the larger highway. I arrived at Ardenvale as the sun was properly up. The gas station had a small shop attached. I used a bank card I had not touched in 2 years, one linked to my personal accounts from Moonridge, not Wraithspire, and I withdrew enough to cover 3 weeks of travel without creating a financial pattern that would flag easily. I bought water, a road atlas, a wrapped sandwich I ate standing outside on a wooden bench in the cold. I left my pack-issued phone, the sleek one with the Wraithspire household accounts loaded onto it, or the one that knew my location at all times, in the trash can at the edge of the parking lot under a gas receipt. Walked away without looking back. Inside the shop, there had been a woman behind the counter. Silver-haired, unhurried, the manner of someone who had seen everything the morning shift had to offer over many years, and had chosen peace with all of it. When she counted out my change, she placed it on the counter rather than in my hand. She did not make eye contact in a way that felt invasive. She just put the money down, nodded once, and went back to her receipts, as though she understood, without being told, that this was someone who did not want to be touched right now. I noticed this. It meant something, the noticing. I filed it alongside the lavender and the ridge path, and all the small things I had gathered over 3 years that had nothing to do with palaces or politics. Small kindnesses were always worth noting. The bus south came at 8:30. Vinyl seats, the smell of other people's long journeys, a window that sealed imperfectly and let in a thin curl of cold air all the way down the mountain road. I took a seat near the back, arranged my bag at my feet, and watched Wraithspire's peak disappear as the road curved. I did not think I would come back. I was wrong about that. But that is what I believed at 8:30, on a bus smelling of vinyl and winter, with a brass-clasped bag and a pressed lavender journal and 8 weeks of something I had not yet told anyone. Hold on, I thought. Not a prayer. More like a promise. The mountains went blue in the distance, then smaller, then gone. I watched them go through the imperfect window seal, the cold air threading in against my cheek, and I let myself cry. Not heavily, not dramatically. The quiet, steady kind where you keep your face turned toward the glass, and your breathing almost even, and anyone looking would think you were simply watching the landscape. Pack wolves learn, early, to grieve sideways. You feel what you feel, but you feel it where the room cannot quite see it. I was not crying for Torvin. Not exactly. I was crying for the version of him I had arrived believing in. That man at the bonding fire, steady and golden lit, whose gaze had stayed on my face long enough that I had thought something was beginning. I was allowed to grieve that version. He had been real, even if he had also been a misreading. I was crying for 3 years of mornings that had been mine and not mine simultaneously. For the ridge path I would not walk again for a while. For Elira's jaw and her honesty, and the way she had never once called me Luna, like the title was a wall between us. For old Mara's expression that I had never asked about, and now never would. You are allowed to grieve the things that were genuinely good, even inside something that was not. As the bus moved south, and the landscape flattened from mountain to valley to open plain, I turned Visira's words over carefully in my mind. The way you handle something you suspect might be sharp. Does she think that is what holds a king? The tea, the lavender, or the small consistent kindnesses I had spent 3 years offering to a house that accepted them without asking what they cost. Here is what I decided. Somewhere between the 4th and 5th mile south of Arden Vale. There was nothing wrong with the tea. Nothing soft or foolish about pressing lavender in a journal on an evening ridge walk. Nothing small about learning the name of every pack member's child, or figuring out which elder preferred a bow and which preferred a nod. Those were not signs of someone who didn't understand what held a king. Those were signs of someone who understood entirely, and chose, generously, and perhaps too long, to offer that understanding to people who had not earned it. The error was not the warmth. The error was staying somewhere that called the warmth convenient. I would not make that error again. Or the city of Renholm was 6 hours south of the mountain range, mid-sized, human scale, the kind of place where nobody looks twice at anyone. Wide streets with old trees dropping their last leaves, a neighborhood of tall buildings with laundry on the upper balconies, a smell of something frying from a restaurant somewhere, garlic and oil, warm and entirely ordinary. I found a motel near the bus station, cash only. The clerk did not ask questions. The room was small and faced the parking lot, and the carpet was a shade of beige that had given up on itself many years ago, and I closed the door behind me and stood in the center of it, and breathed. Mine. Completely, unremarkably, entirely mine. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. Then I found the landline on the nightstand. Old, with actual buttons, and I dialed a number I had not dialed in 2 years, because I had told myself, carefully and consistently, that there was nothing wrong, that I did not need to call, that I was fine. 3 rings. Hello? Seleneva. A pause. Then, Zanera. What number is this? Are you all right? Seleneva Ashenvale. My oldest friend. We had grown up 3 towns apart in the Moonridge territory, and she had been one of those people who had simply always been there. Not dramatically, not loudly, just consistently, and without conditions. She sent letters with hand-drawn borders around the edges. She had once driven 6 hours in heavy rain to help me move apartments, and had asked for nothing on the way back, except company and the radio. She had never been part of any pack politics. She painted landscapes, argued with her landlord about the light in the fourth-floor studio, and called me on my birthday at exactly midnight because she said the wishes were stronger at the exact moment. The question landed so simply. Are you all right? Not what happened. Not what did he do. Just, are you all right? With the full weight of someone who has known you long enough to hear the real answer underneath any answer you might give. Something I had been holding very carefully together since the corridor came undone. Not everything, just the outermost layer, the part that had been keeping my voice, even on a bus, and my breathing measured, and my face turned toward the window. I will be, I said. Not yes. Not fine. I will be. The most honest 3 words I had spoken in 3 years. Selenova was quiet for a moment. Then, come here. Come straight here. And the room with the green curtains is already yours. Not, tell me everything. Not, what did he do? Should I drive up there? I'm going to say something. Just, come here. The room is yours. I held the phone for a moment after she said it. I'll take the morning bus, I said. I'll have something warm when you arrive. I sat on the motel bed for a long time after I hung up, the phone still resting in both hands, and I thought about what it meant to be wanted rather than needed. Torvin had needed me in the political sense, needed the bridge, needed the lunar title filled, needed the arrangement to function smoothly. That was a real need. It just had nothing to do with me specifically. Selenova said, "Come here," before she even knew the story. Was before she knew what had happened, or whether it was recoverable, or what it was going to cost either of us. She said it in the tone of someone for whom the question of whether to offer shelter is not a question at all. That is what wanting someone in your corner looks like. I understood the difference now, in a way I had not fully understood it before. And the understanding did not make me angry at Torvin. Not yet. Not with that particular clean heat. It made me grieve, quietly and completely, for the 3 years in which I had confused the two things. Before I slept, in the beige motel room with the parking lot hum outside and the landline sitting quiet on the nightstand, I placed my hands flat on my abdomen. I had not told anyone yet. I had not let myself think about it directly, not in the corridor, not on the bus, or not until this quiet, anonymous room gave me enough space to look at it straight. Something was beginning, quietly and stubbornly, and completely regardless of what was happening in Wraithspire, or on any mountain road, or in any private study. Something already real, already growing, already, if I was being honest with myself, already the single most important thing in all of this. Hold on, I said again. Same as I'd said on the bus. Same voice. Same promise. I meant it more now. Selenova's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades, but kept its character. The staircase had a particular creak on the 3rd step from the top that I learned to avoid within the first week. At the restaurant below, a small family place that opened for lunch and dinner, and occasionally breakfast if the owner felt like it, sent garlic and warm oil up through the floor every afternoon at 12:30. The windows in the main room were tall and let in an amount of light that Selenova described as adequate, and I found genuinely generous, having spent 3 years in Wraithspire's stone-walled rooms where the light arrived late and left early. The room with the green curtains was exactly as it had been in the photograph she once sent me. Small, clean, a narrow bed with a quilt in shades of forest, a desk near the window, a small lamp with a warm bulb. Selenova had put a jar of dried flowers on the desk. Not lavender, something else, something orange and unfamiliar, that she said came from a plant she was growing in a pot on the fire escape. I stood in the doorway for a moment, and felt the particular sensation of a room that has been prepared for you, not fitted to a title, not arranged to receive a Luna, arranged for Zanira, which meant arranged simply, with warmth, with the understanding that what she needed most was ordinary. I cried again then, properly this time. Selenova held my shoulder and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. We ate that first evening at her small kitchen table. She had made soup, something thick with root vegetables, the kind of meal that asks nothing of you except to eat it. She talked about her current painting, about a neighbor who had installed wind chimes on the balcony above, and the ongoing negotiations about volume. Or she did not ask about Torvin. She did not ask about Wraithspire. She understood, as she had always understood, that some things needed to be put down before they could be looked at. The second day she asked, "What do you need?" Not what happened. Not what are you going to do. What do you need? I thought about it. A doctor, I said. One who understands our kind. Seleneva nodded without surprise. She already knew. She had always been able to read between the words I chose when I chose them carefully. She made a phone call that afternoon, and 3 days later, I was sitting in the quiet office of a man named Dr. Orvex, 60 years old, silver-haired at the temples, with the unhurried manner of someone who had stopped being surprised by the world decades ago, and had found, in that unsurprisable state, a deep and useful calm. He examined me with the careful attention of someone who genuinely listened to what a body was telling him. 9 weeks, he said. Not tentatively, with the quiet certainty of a man who has done this many times. Strong markers, lichen pregnancies move differently from what you may have read. Pay attention to what you feel, not what the standard charts say. Your body will tell you what it needs. He looked at me over the edge of his reading glasses. Are you safe? Yes, I said. Now I am. He nodded once, as though this was exactly the right answer, and wrote down the names of the herbs that would support the early weeks. I walked home from his office slowly, through the fallen-leaf streets of Renholm, and I thought about the low hum I had been carrying beneath my ribs for weeks, the one I had been explaining away with altitude and stress and poor sleep. I thought about it differently after speaking with Dr. Orvex, less like a complication, more like a fact. More like a presence, quiet and stubborn, and already beginning to shape the edges of every decision I was going to make going forward. On the 3rd week, I found the library, 3 blocks from Seleneva's building, an old stone one, with carved owls above the entrance doors and the warm smell of serious paper inside. I had passed it twice before I went in. I am not sure why I waited. Perhaps I needed the rest of those 2 weeks first. Perhaps you have to become a little still before you can learn. What I was looking for was not in the general collection. But libraries, what if you know how to ask, sometimes have rooms that are not advertised. A quiet woman at the reference desk, early 50s, reading glasses on a chain, looked at me for a moment, then at the paper where I had written down what I needed, and then she led me through a door behind the periodicals and down a short corridor to a room with a locked cabinet and a key on a hook. Pack law, lichen history, the statutes governing supernatural bonds, dissolution of same, and the legal standing of children born to alpha bloodlines. I spent 4 weeks in that room. I took notes in a new journal, the plain kind, no lavender, just ink on white paper and the growing architecture of a plan. I read until the library closed. I came back the next morning before it opened and waited on the stone steps with coffee from the corner cart, watching the carved owls until the door unlocked. Here is what Pack law says about a child born to an alpha king outside a formal bond dissolution. The child carries full bloodline standing, regardless of where they are born, regardless of what happened between the parents, regardless of any subsequent bond the alpha forms. The child cannot be erased from the lineage record by declaration, by silence, or by the installation of a new Luna. The child must be formally recognized by the council, and any dissolution proceeding that does not account for an existing heir is legally incomplete and subject to challenge. I found this on a Wednesday afternoon in a subsection of a document written in the Pack Council's formal language, buried under 6 other provisions that dealt with less interesting things. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the document carefully, filed my notes, thanked the reference librarian on my way out, and walked back to Seleneva's building in the early November dark with a feeling I hadn't had in 3 years. Certainty. Not about Torvin. Not about Wraithspire. About myself. About what I was carrying and what it meant legally, and what rights I had, and what I was going to do with all of it. The woman who had arrived in Wrenholm with a brass-clasped bag and a quiet sadness was not the same woman who walked through Seleneva's door that Wednesday evening. Something had assembled itself during those weeks, quietly, steadily, without announcement. The way strength builds, not in a single moment of decision, but in 1,000 small ones. Reading one more page, coming back the next morning, asking the right question, writing down the answer. Well, Seleneva was in the kitchen when I came in, and she looked up and saw my face and put down her spatula. "You found something," she said. "Several things," I said. "Is there more soup?" She laughed. It was the first time I had heard myself be easy in weeks. Torvin appeared in my thoughts sometimes during those weeks. Not with longing, not exactly. But he was there, particularly in the evenings, when the light in the apartment went amber and the city outside quieted down to its lower hum. I thought about the bonding ceremony. I thought about the early months, when there had been moments, brief and unguarded, of something that had felt almost like real closeness. There had been an evening in the first year when I found him on the ridge path at dusk, alone, without the alpha stillness that he wore in the hall. Just a man watching the sun go down with his hands in his pockets and nothing performing. He had heard me approach and turned and looked at me, and in his face, briefly, there was something unarmored, something that might have been the beginning of knowing someone. I had chosen, the next morning, to say nothing about it. I understood that some moments belong only to the person inside them, and I had wanted to give him that one. I held that memory differently now, in Seleneva's apartment, with Pack law notes spread across the kitchen table. Not with bitterness, with a clear, honest grief for the road not taken. For 2 people who might have found their way to something real if either of them had been braver sooner. It was not a productive grief, but it was an honest one, as an honest grief moves through you more cleanly than the kind you dress up in other clothes. By week 12, I had a plan. Not a plan for revenge, not a plan to expose or punish or make anyone regret in the loud, satisfying way that stories sometimes offer. A plan to protect what was mine, which was, first and finally, the child growing steadily and stubbornly, and with no interest in anyone's politics in the space beneath my ribs. I was not going to disappear. I was not going to let the legal record erase what existed. I was going to use every line I had read in that library room, and I was going to walk back into Wraithspire, and I was going to make sure that my daughter's place in the history of that pack was written down in permanent ink before anyone decided it was inconvenient. I was ready. Almost. It was Seleneva who found it, at a Saturday morning. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop and her second coffee, and I was across from her with the Pack law notes and my cold first coffee, and she went very still in a way that made me look up. She turned the laptop toward me without saying anything. I read it twice. It was posted to one of the private forums, the closed networks that carry news through the supernatural community, the ones that serve the same function that a public notice board would in a human town. Official. Bloodless. Formatted in the style of Wraithspire Council communications, which I recognized immediately, because I had proofread dozens of them over 3 years. The Luna of Wraithspire has stepped back from her duties for personal reasons. The position is currently under review. Ought further announcements to follow from the Elder Council. Under review. Not missing. Not lost. Not... And this was the part that settled into my chest with the specific weight of something very cold. Not even named. A position. Under review. As though I were a policy that had been evaluated and found wanting, rather than a woman who had brought tea every morning for 3 years and pressed lavender on ridge walks and stayed up past midnight learning the names of children who did not even know she was paying attention. I closed the laptop gently. My hand moved, as it often did now, to my abdomen. Let them review, I thought, because they did not know what I knew. Zanera, Seleneva said. I saw it, I said. What does it mean? It means he's moving faster than I expected. I stood up and brought my coffee to the window. Outside, but the Renholm street was Sunday quiet. 2 dogs on a walk, a child on a bicycle with a helmet 2 sizes too large. He needs the bond formally dissolved to install Visira cleanly. To do that under charter law, he needs my formal presence at a dissolution hearing, or a documented declaration that I have abandoned my role and cannot be located. Seleneva was quiet for a moment. Which one is he pursuing? The second one, I said. He hasn't announced I'm missing. He announced the position is under review. He's building a record that I left voluntarily and cannot be reached. After a set number of weeks, that becomes an abandonment declaration under PAC law. Can he do that? I thought about the subsection I had read 3 weeks ago in the library room. He can try. 3 days later, a message arrived through Doctor, or Orvex's private channel. The careful routing that exists for exactly these situations. Medical practitioners who understand that the world contains more than most people are told about, who maintain secure lines for patients whose circumstances require discretion. The message came from Valor Ravencrest, Torvin's head enforcer. I had known Valor by sight for 3 years, and by reputation for longer. He was 40-something, grey-eyed, built like someone who had long ago stopped caring whether he looked approachable. He had served Wraithspire for 15 years with the kind of total loyalty that does not announce itself because it does not need to. He had never, in all my time at Wraithspire, been warm to me. He had also never been cold. He had been, I realized now, simply precise, measuring everything, while committing his attention only to things he had determined were worth it. The message was short, in his voice, which even in text was stripped of everything unnecessary. I know you are safe. I have not told anyone that I know. What is moving here will reach you whether you prepare for it or not. I have submitted a formal request to the Elder Council under Charter Provision 7, requiring that a sitting Luna be given opportunity to address the Council before dissolution proceedings are finalized. Torvin cannot block this without violating the Charter himself. You have 17 days. Prepare. I read it in Dr. Orvex's office, standing, and I was quiet for a long moment. His motivation is not me, I said, mostly to myself. Dr. Orvex looked up. He is doing this for the PAC, I said. Not for me. He's calculated that dissolving a bond without a proper hearing is a charter violation that will weaken Wraithspire's standing with the other PACs. He's protecting the institution. Does the reason matter? Dr. Orvek said. Mildly, the way he said most things. I thought about it. No, I said. It makes him credible. A man acting for the pack has no reason to mislead me. That matters. That evening I told Selenova. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, with her hands wrapped around her mug and her eyes on my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll drive. You don't have to, I said. You came alone when you left, she said. You shouldn't go back alone. There was nothing to argue with in that, but there was also something in it that I felt in the same place where I had felt the tea and the lavender and the green curtains and the soup, in the part of me that was learning, slowly, the difference between warmth that costs the giver something and warmth offered with no calculation at all. I spent the next 4 days preparing. I read the charter provisions until I could cite them from memory. I organized my notes into a shape that could be delivered in front of a council, not as an argument, not as a performance, but as a plain and documented statement of facts. I thought carefully about what I was going to say, and I decided not to rehearse it. Rehearsed words sound like what they are. I would simply say what was true. The night before we left, I sat at Seleneva's kitchen table for a long time after she had gone to bed. The city outside was quiet. The restaurant below had closed hours ago. The apartment smelled like garlic and the orange-dried flowers from the fire escape pot. I thought about what I was going back into. I thought about what I was carrying. I thought about Torvin, not with fear, not with anger exactly, but with the clear, grounded knowledge that whatever he had thought he was building when he married me, and whatever he had decided I was worth, and whatever he intended to do now with Vesera and a formal council dissolution, none of it had accounted for this. None of it had accounted for me. I placed my hands on the table, flat, breathed. In 17 days I would walk back into the great hall of Wraithspire, and I would not be walking back as a woman asking for her place. I would be walking back as a woman who had spent 12 weeks learning exactly what that place was worth, and what the law said about it, and what no council, no Alpha King, and no formally considered and reviewed position announcement could quietly erase. I was ready now, completely ready. The mountains came back slowly. We drove north on the second day, Selenova and I, with her car and her easy silence, and a travel bag of snacks she had prepared with the meticulous care of someone who believes that long drives are improved significantly by the right provisions. The city fell away behind us. The landscape climbed. Bare trees gave way to pine. Pine to the high, dark firs that meant you were within the mountain's territory. And then I felt it. That old, specific pull in my chest that every pack-born wolf knows. Home ground, as I let myself feel it without deciding what it meant. Are you nervous? Seleneva said. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. I was nervous for 3 years. I am finished with that. She looked at the road, nodded once, turned the radio down slightly, because she has always understood when silence is the right thing. Valor was waiting at the eastern boundary. He was standing at the standing stone that marked Wraithspire's edge, alone in a plain coat, with his arms at his sides, and his grey eyes doing the thing they always did, which was assess everything without revealing that they were doing so. He looked at me. He looked at Seleneva in the driver's seat. Something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not warmth exactly, but acknowledgement. You didn't come alone, he said. I learned from someone sensible, I said. He held my gaze for a moment, and then, very slightly, the corner of his mouth moved. It was the closest thing to approval I had ever seen on his face. He turned toward the mountain road. "Torvin knows you're coming," he said, walking. The charter request I filed required him to be notified. He had 24 hours to challenge it, and didn't, which means the hearing proceeds. The council is convened for this afternoon. Visira? Present. She's had a day to prepare. So have I said. 12 weeks longer, actually. Valor glanced at me sideways. Something passed through his grey eyes. "Yes," he said. "I thought you might have." The great hall was fuller than it should have been for a procedural meeting. Word moves through a pack the way it moves through a small town. Not through announcement, but through atmosphere. By the time I walked through the inner doors, there were pack members lining the upper gallery who had no official reason to be there, and the energy in the air was the particular electric stillness of a community that understands something significant is about to happen and is collectively holding its breath to watch it. I walked through that energy the way I had learned in 3 years of Wraithspire to walk through spaces that were not sure what to do with me. Straight, unhurried, without performance. I recognized faces. The elder from the North Wing, who had not respected me yet in month 3, he saw me and looked away first. The young woman who managed the pack's external correspondence, who had always nodded at me in corridors with the specific nod of someone who sees more than they say. Elira was on the upper gallery. She was leaning forward with both forearms on the railing, jaw set, eyes tracking me across the room. When I looked up and caught her gaze, her expression did not soften. Elira's face did not do softening exactly. But something in it opened. Something fierce and uncomplicated that I recognized as loyalty, even though she would never have used that word about it. I held her gaze for a moment and nodded. She nodded back. Once. Like a promise. Near the corridor entrance, just inside the doorframe, Mara Grimwood stood with her hands pressed flat to her front. Both of them. The way you hold yourself when you are feeling something strongly and have decided to feel it quietly. She watched me pass, and her expression was the one I had never been able to name, and I understood it now. She had known. She had seen things in 3 years that she had not said, and she had carried the weight of them, and the expression was the look of a woman who is watching someone finally arrive at a truth she has been quietly, painfully hoping they would find. I walked past her toward the council chamber. The chamber was carved from the mountain's own stone, 7 elders at the long, dark table. Torchlight, the smell of cold rock and old wood. Kyrian blood moon at the far end, senior elder, silver-bearded, with the careful stillness of a man who has been in rooms like this long enough to know the difference between a procedural hearing and something larger than that. He saw me and folded his hands on the table with the particular attention of a person who intended to remember everything about the next hour. Torvin was at the head of the table. When he looked up and saw me walk through the door, and I want to be honest about this, because I said at the beginning that I would be honest, something happened in his face that I had never seen happen before. Something uncontrolled, brief, and suppressed very quickly, the way he suppressed everything that was not useful to him, but there for a moment, visible and real. Not surprise. Beneath surprise. The expression of a man who has been telling himself a story about who someone is, and has just found that story directly contradicted by the person herself, walking into the room with 12 weeks of pack lore in her head and her hands steady at her sides. He looked at me the way I had looked at Wraithspire from the bus window as the mountains disappeared. Like something he had decided to let go of, appearing unexpectedly, or unmistakably, still present. Visira sat 2 chairs to his left. She was composed and beautiful, and her eyes, when they found mine, were the eyes of someone doing a rapid calculation and not entirely liking the results. I stood at the center of the chamber, Kyrian said in the formal voice, "Zanira Moonridge, you have been summoned before the Elder Council of Wraithspire in the matter of the current bond status and pending dissolution request. You may speak." I had decided not to perform. I had decided this 6 weeks ago, sitting at a borrowed kitchen table with cooling tea and Pack law texts spread around me. A woman who performs sounds like a woman performing. What I needed the council to hear was not a performance. It was a fact. So I said what was true, or in the voice of someone who had spent 12 weeks becoming certain enough to say it plainly. I left this pack because I was called convenient, because I was described, to a woman in a warm private room, as someone who meant well. I want to tell you what I mean. I paused. The torchlight held still. Somewhere above us, in the gallery, I heard no movement at all. I'm the kind of woman who brings tea because she believes small kindnesses matter, not because she is performing them, but because she means them. I learned the name of every child in this pack. I pressed lavender from the ridge path in my journal. I figured out which of your elders prefers a bow and which prefers a nod, and I gave each of them what they preferred without being asked. I tried, with everything I had, to love this place and the people in it. I looked at each elder in turn, slowly, without hurrying. I was described as decoration. I have spent 12 weeks deciding what I am actually made of. What I found is this. I am the kind of woman who, when she is told she does not matter, reads every line of Pack law ever written. And what I found in those pages is something that cannot be dissolved by a council announcement, cannot be reviewed into non-existence, and cannot be quietly set aside because it has become inconvenient. I placed both hands on my abdomen. The chamber's silence changed quality. It became the silence of a room where every person has just processed the same information simultaneously, and none of them has yet decided what to do with their face. Kyrian's expression did not move, but his eyes, sharp and silver and very old, went from my hands to my face to Torvin and back again in a calculation so fast it was almost invisible. Torvin went absolutely still. Not the practiced stillness of the Alpha, the involuntary stillness of a man whose internal architecture has just been rearranged without his permission. "I am 14 weeks along," I said. "Dr. Orvex of the Renholm Independent Practice has documented it fully. I have his records here." I produced the folder from my bag, organized, complete, every page numbered. I placed it on the table in front of Kyrian. Under Charter Provision 12, subsection 3, no dissolution of an alpha bond may be finalized while the bond carries documented evidence of an heir. At any such dissolution attempted without full council acknowledgement of the heir's standing is legally incomplete and subject to reversal. I looked at Kyrian. "I do not want a war," I said. "I do not want a title I was never truly given. I want one thing, and I want it written down in this council's official record before anyone in this room decides it is inconvenient. The standing of my child in the history of Wraithspire. The recognition that she exists, that she is real, that she cannot be quietly erased." I waited. The silence was very long. Kyrian spoke first, carefully, citing the provision number exactly as I had cited it, his voice carrying the weight of a man who has memorized Pack law the way some people memorize prayers. He cited the legal standing. He cited the documentation requirement. He cited the precedent. But then Mara Grimwood spoke. She had come into the chamber at some point during my words. I had not seen her enter. She stood near the door and she spoke without drama, in the voice of a healer who has attended 17 births in Wraithspire and has information that the council did not know she had and had chosen, until this moment, to carry quietly. She said she had looked at Zanira Moonridge in the 2nd month of her first year at Wraithspire, and seen what a healer sees. And she had not said anything, because the appropriate moment had not presented itself, and then too many months passed, and she had lived, since then, with the understanding that she had failed a woman in her care. She said the child was real. She said the standing was clear. She said that a pack that quietly erased its own heirs was not a pack she intended to put her name on. The chamber was silent for another long moment. Then Torvin spoke. He did not look at Visira. He did not make a speech. He did not offer an explanation or a defense or any of the things that a man in his position might reach for when a room has shifted completely beneath him. He said 4 words. Flat. Stripped of performance. The only words the calculation allowed, and underneath the calculation, in his eyes, just briefly, something that was not calculation at all. The child will be recognized. I stood in the center of the chamber, and I received those 4 words without expression. I had prepared for many outcomes. I had not prepared for the particular way it felt to hear them. Not triumphant, not the way the stories say. Like something quieter, something more complete. The thing I had come to ensure was, now, in the official record of Wraithspire, my daughter's place in history, written down, in permanent ink, before anyone could decide it was inconvenient. I didn't go back to live in Wraithspire. I want to be clear about this, because some stories bend toward that ending, the triumphant return, the reinstated title, the grand gesture in the great hall, love restored by the force of everything that nearly destroyed it. This story does not bend that way, not because anyone in it is beyond reach, not because nothing changed, but because 3 years of being called convenient is not a wound that closes over a single council session, and I was no longer willing to build my life in a place where I had to earn my right to exist in it. I had learned, in Renholm, what it felt like to be in a room that wanted me in it. I intended to keep feeling that way. The house is at the mountain's base. Not on the mountain, not inside the pack's formal territory, not subject to the structures I had spent 3 years trying to navigate. At the base, where the mountain's shadow falls in the morning and the ridge is visible from the north window, and the air comes down cold and clean from the pines. A real house, built from local stone, with a kitchen large enough to be useful, and a window seat in the east room that catches the morning light. Mine. Chosen. Paid for with money from Moonridge, and with the settlement that the Elder Council, in its formal resolution of the matter, determined was appropriate under Pack Charter law. Kyrian Bloodmoon had been thorough. I had expected nothing less. The first thing I did when the house was mine was plant something in the garden. I did not press it in a journal. I put it in the ground, where it could grow without being contained. Seleneva moved to the valley 6 months later. She claimed the light was better for her painting. The valley cottage had a north-facing window, she said, that caught the kind of diffuse afternoon light that was ideal for her current work, a series of mountain landscapes that she had been developing since the autumn. She did not say the other thing, which was that she had watched me leave for 12 weeks and return changed, and build a house, and grow steadily, and she intended to be close enough to be useful, which was simply the kind of person she was. I did not argue with the light explanation. I never argue with people whose kindness does not need to justify itself. She is 20 minutes down the road. She comes on Sundays with the wrong amount of coffee, always slightly too much, always slightly too hot, always exactly what I wanted. Dr. Orvex established a part-time practice in a town 15 miles east. He says it is because the patient population there is underserved, which is true and also not the only reason. He sees me once a month and asks 3 questions and listens completely to all 3 answers before moving on. Velor sends brief updates through the same channel he used before. They are always 7 words or fewer. I have come to understand that this is not curtness. It is respect. He says exactly what needs to be said and trusts me to understand the rest. Elira writes letters. They arrive irregularly, on whatever paper she has closest at hand, sometimes lined, sometimes the backs of official Wraithspire communications, once memorably on the cardboard backing of a chocolate bar wrapper. The handwriting is urgent and slightly slanted. The spelling is exactly as good as she has decided it needs to be. She asks about pack law. She asks about the Council's provisions. She asks about the legal standing of wolves who choose to leave and then choose to return on their own terms. I answer every single letter. Completely. Without shortening my answers because she is young. She is not learning to be managed. She is learning to be formidable. I think about her on the ridge path evenings, when the air comes down cold from the pines, and the sky goes that particular amber grey that Wraithspire makes at dusk. And I think she is going to be something the pack did not see coming. And I think, good. Sorey was born in early spring. The morning was clear for the first time in 2 weeks. Mara Grimwood delivered her. She had asked, and I had said yes before she finished asking. She drove down from the mountain in the dark, and she arrived with her hand steady, and her manner the same as it always was. Calm, capable, entirely without drama. She had been present at 17 births in Wraithspire. She was present at this one. My daughter arrived in the east room, in the house at the mountain's base, with the first spring light coming through the window. She had Torvin's dark eyes. She had, and this surprised me every time I looked at it, his particular stillness, that quality of complete presence, that his had always been armoured, and hers was simply open. She came into the world and looked at it with an alertness that felt too specific for a newborn, as though she had been paying attention from the very beginning, and was simply, now, in a position to do so more openly. Her name is Sorey. It means new sky, in the oldest form of our language. I chose it sitting in the east room 3 weeks before she arrived, watching the window and thinking about what it meant to start something without pretense, without a title or a political arrangement or an audience expecting performance. Just, new, honest, entirely hers. Torvin comes to see her. This began 3 weeks after she was born. He arrived at the house. He had sent a message through Velor first, because even then he was careful about arriving unannounced. And he stood in the doorway for a moment before I let him in, and he looked at me with the expression of a man who has decided to say something and is still working out how to say it. He said, "Thank you for letting me come." I stepped back from the door. He has come every 2 weeks since, consistently, quietly, without audience. He arrives, he spends an hour with Sorey, and here I will tell you something I hadn't anticipated, which is that the carefulness he could never quite extend to me in our years of marriage, he extends to her absolutely. He holds her with both hands, supporting her head, always. He speaks to her in a voice I had never heard him use. Lower, without the alpha weight in it. Simply a voice. He stays the time he said he would stay, and then he leaves when he said he would leave, and he does not ask for more than what he is offered. He never calls me convenient again. I think he understands, without either of us naming it, that the word cost him more than he knew when he used it. On a morning in late autumn, the first one, when Sorey was 7 months old and sitting up on her own, and examining the world with that particular night-fang stillness that I have stopped trying to interpret and simply observe. He came to bring her back from a walk along the lower path. He stood in the doorway and looked at me for a moment. "Are you happy?" he said. Not a weighted question. Not the question of a man looking for an opening. Just a question. Not the kind you ask someone when you have been thinking about them and have decided their answer matters to you. I thought about it honestly. I owed him honesty, at least. We had run out of the other currency. "More than I was," I said. "More every day." He nodded. He did not push. He did not offer anything in return, which would have been too easy and probably not real. He simply received what I had said and stood with it for a moment, and then said good night and walked back down the path to where he had parked. It was the most respectful thing he had ever done. What grows between us now is not the marriage. It is something I do not have an easy name for. A mutual, slow, unperformed adjustment. Two people who have stopped trying to be what they were supposed to be to each other, and are, for the first time, to simply an occasional proximity without pretense. Whether this becomes something, whether the years ahead bring two people who have finally stopped performing into something that could be called chosen, the story does not know yet. Neither do I. I leave that window open. On the first anniversary of the day I left Wraithspire, I walked the ridge path. It took an hour to get to it from the house at the mountain's base, up through the pines, along the east-facing slope, to the wide flat stretch of open ridge where the sky goes enormous, and the valley below is a long green spread in every direction. The lavender grows wild there in summer. In late autumn, the stems are dry and grey-silver, still smelling faintly of themselves. I pressed a stem of it in Sore's first journal, without apology, without the complicated feeling that had always accompanied the habit when I was Luna, the sense that I was doing something small and slightly embarrassing in the wrong kind of house, just with joy. Simple, uncomplicated, entirely genuine joy. I hope she keeps the habit her whole life. I hope she fills 100 journals with it. I hope she learns what I learned, that small and tender things are not signs of softness. They are signs of someone who has decided the world is worth paying that kind of attention to. The mountain stood above me in the autumn cold, patient and enormous, and entirely indifferent to the particular human and not quite human dramas that have played out at its feet for generations. The cedar smoke drifted down from the direction of Wraithspire, the way it always did in cold weather, and the other smell beneath it, wolf and stone and ancient, came with it, the way it always had. I breathed it in, not with pain, not with the careful, neutral breath of someone managing their feelings carefully enough not to show them. Just breathed. The way you breathe in something that used to be your whole world and is now simply part of the larger air you live in, part of the landscape you carry without being contained by it. Sorai was with Seleneva for the morning. She would be passed between them with supreme confidence, held by someone who had chosen to be in her life without any obligation requiring it. I stayed on the ridge for a long time. The valley below was gold in the late October light. The pines on the far slope had gone to their darkest green. Somewhere down the mountain, the smoke was rising from chimneys in the small settlement at the base, Ardenvale, where a silver-haired woman behind a counter had once put change on the counter instead of in my hand and had not asked any questions. Small kindnesses. They add up. When I came back down the ridge and pushed open the door of the house that was mine, the morning light was on the east room floor in long, warm strips. The journal was on the table where I had left it. The pressed lavender stem, still damp from the walk, lay carefully between the open pages. I sat at the table and let the light be on my hands. My daughter's name is Sore. She will grow up at the base of a mountain, with pine smell and an open sky, and a mother who chose her completely, not as a political arrangement, not as a bridge between bloodlines, or not as anything convenient or reviewed or under consideration, simply as herself, as the whole world. That is what I meant when I told the Elder Council of Wraithspire what kind of woman I was. That is what I have always meant. The cedar smoke drifted past the east window. I breathed it in, and I did not flinch. And outside the window the ridge was clear, and the sky was the honest blue of a morning that belongs to nobody in particular, and so, in the way of honest things, belongs to everyone.